There it is. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. Very excited. We got Steve all the way up at the top here. We got Mike. We got Clay. We got Gordo. We got Sean. This is going to be a outstanding conversation. Now, while I am excited, y'all should be too. Make sure you're doing the things like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff. That way you get your emails whenever we go live. Of course, Gold Mines on Wednesday and The Collective on Fridays. Now, if you have any thoughts, questions, comments, anything at all, by all means, put them up in the comment section and we can engage those throughout the show. But let's get some intros right out of the way. Steve, you're on top. 10 to 15 seconds. Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff.
All right, Steve Wilson, high school teacher, mountain bike coach, avid hunter and outdoorsman. Been on the road for the last 3 weeks and just kind of trying to settle back into home as a transition, and then getting ready already to pack up and head to Europe next week. So glad I could make it.
Bam. Caught you right in between the things. Mike, how about yourself?
Hey, man. How are you guys? Hey, everybody. My name is Mike. I run the blog spotup.com. It's a tactical blog. I am a maker of memes. I don't know if anybody reads them as much as I like to write them, but that's what I do. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Clay, how about yourself?
Yeah, so I try to get better at this each time, and I feel like I fail. But I'm educated as a counselor, mostly addiction. I decided when I got my GI Bill that I was going to get an education in something that I'm naturally inclined towards. So that's my inclination is towards psychology and human beings and how we work. And yeah, I'm a veteran in the Army. I'm in Virginia, and it's always good seeing you guys.
Always good hanging out with you, brother. Gordo, how about yourself?
What's going on, guys? Gordo from the East Coast, coming from Moncton, New Brunswick, ex-Cansoft dude. I guess I'm a bit of a veteran advocate these days. I'm just trying to push the ball down the field to get our veterans what they deserve. And I think that's the gateway, that once we let our veterans kind of take the lead, send us kind of mentality for new treatment modalities, then we can transition that to the general population.
Bam.
That is it.
Love it.
It's Airborne Friday.
And Airborne Friday, I like it.
All the way.
It's also Red Friday as well. So it's a couple things. Sean, how's life out in the mountains?
Things are good. It's great listening to the intros by the fellas because, everyone's been on the show before. And I love, as Clay said, or referred to, that you're just trying to do it better every time. And I've seen everyone on this show come in doing better every time. And I just love the fact that today we're going to be talking about from thoughts to action, when literally we've got a perfect representation of a bunch of fellas who are all about thoughts and action. So really looking forward to this one.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one. I have a very broad general question that I'm going to hit you guys first with, and that is how do you personally translate your thoughts into actions? Because I know everybody has their own little style, everyone has their own little take on it. I want to get each of you guys' direct thoughts on how you do it. Steve, I'm going to start with you. What do you got?
Man, that's a big one. For me, it's purpose. But for me, I'm a big thinker, and I always have been. I've always been, even as a youngster, I was always looking at the world through sort of a global lens. Where do I fit into this whole thing? And for me, those big thoughts can be, they can be troublesome at times, just because it's they are so big. And for me, the first step is absolutely finding purpose. Where can this thought be purposeful? How can I use this thought with some sort of purpose, as opposed to just sitting here spinning my wheels? So that would be the first thing. And then taking purpose and then finding areas where I can serve. I feel my imposter syndrome is off the charts right now, because I'm sitting here in a virtual room with fellas that have all served in very serious capacities. And my service, though, has depth, but it doesn't have a level of intensity that yours may have. So I just find ways to find my purpose and have it be service based. How can I serve the greater community through this thought that has created purpose in me?
I like that. I like that a lot, especially the idea. I guess intensity is a good word for it, but I would say mentoring the youth of the nation would be a level of service that most of us don't have experience in. So I'm tracking. Mike, thoughts on this?
Good question. I really like it. If you think about the really notable civilizations throughout history, it's always about knowledge. And if you had knowledge, then you could do something with that. And so knowledge is really power. And when you think about the Oracle and Leonidas, this Oracle gave him an answer, but sometimes you have to ask the right question. Well, in one example, for example, here, he was told that people are going to die. And so he decided to stand up an army using all men that had sons, that if they died, their sons would carry on. And so he made a decision that would ensure the legacy of that nation, the Spartan state, and that they could move forward. But as a young man, I'll tell you, I read a lot of books, hundreds and hundreds of books, because I was in an existential crisis mode. And as I got older and I began to understand what my meaning, my purpose is, what are my core values, I read less books and I started to take more action. And it came out of habit. So for me to make thought into action, a lot of it is just really easy for me. When I get really stuck in crisis mode, there are things that I'll do, which is go for a run or talk to someone. But to make thought to action, again, as the other guest said, is really what do you know? What do you believe? And then, as I think it was, can't recall who that was. It was, I think, Tolstoy. He said, if there's something, no, it was G.B. Shaw. And he said, what a man wishes to do, he will find a way to make it so. And so a lot of it is coming down to what do you believe? If you feel it, if you have a good sense of what it might be, you'll find a way to get it done.
That is very true. Clay, thoughts on this?
Yeah. Honestly, I guess it's just as simple as for me. It's just application of knowledge, right? That's where it becomes action and wisdom. So I worked at a really low level substance abuse clinic, which essentially they're harm reduction clinics because these people are on the cusp of many different diseases and comorbidities and all that. But it's interesting because some of these people would come in and they would have all the answers. Like they would know what they need to do. They would know the 12 steps. They would have their spirituality and could quote scripture to you if they wanted to. But what to me, after time of watching, like what caused them to keep coming back? And it was just the inability to apply what they know or what they hear and embody it. So I think I'm lucky as a young person. I had older brothers and we just did and applied. But looking back at it and looking at it objectively, I think that for thought to become action, there has to be some application of the knowledge.
I like the way you worded that. It was nice. Gordo, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the more practical root of it. Is that you need to write it down. You have the idea. I don't know the stats. I don't know the people. So don't deadly quote me on this, but you can Google it. That the one side of your brain is for thoughts. The other side is for action or actually doing it. So when you write something down and it crosses over, there's something that actually takes place where you have an increased chance of like actually doing what you said you wanted to do. I think you can apply that to everything in life, especially graphic design. They're always yelling at us, hey, in school, you need to draw it out first, draw it out. And that's what you have to do. You have to do the exact same thing with any type of goal. You write it down, you reverse engineer it. How are you going to achieve the goal? What you need to do? What are the metrics? Then you have the metrics, and now you know how to get there. So I'm all about the practical application of writing it down. I've got my little agenda here, and that's if it doesn't get written down, it's just a thought, right? It's not actually. I don't think it's actually going to take place.
I find it my brain falls into the ether. If I don't actually put it on paper, it just disappears off into the distance. Sean, what are your thoughts on this?
Right. So I do have some thoughts. And funnily enough, we're talking about writing. And I'm going to flow this in front of the camera here in a sec. It's about Point Break. The t-shirt that I'm wearing. I hope everyone gets the reference. This t-shirt just got dropped literally at Operation Pegasus Jump at the drop zone. Big J, Jason, who's been a guest on the podcast a number of times from Blackbird Industries. Shout out, bro. He arrived at the drop zone and he had a bunch of boxes in the back of his truck. And he'd barely come to a stop when I was sauntering over to see what he had. And I eyeballed the boxes and said, I'll take the first one. So I got the first T-shirt out of this drop, this new release that he's got about Endless Summer. And all the troops were jonesing and grabbing T-shirts, giving him the cash, and basically he sold out. And now he's doing another run. Now, I put all of that in place to state this. This T-shirt kind of came about back and forth with some friends of Jason's, and one of his friends, and a big fan of the movie Point Break, is Tim Turner. And so Tim, of course, is pivotal to Operation Pegasus Jump, and maybe between the two of them, they decide to go thematically with this T-shirt for this summer. But I love the movie, man, and I know that it's Tim Turner's favorite movie for a variety of reasons. In fact, his dog is named Bodie. And so I was thinking about that this morning as I was running upstairs to grab an Airborne T-shirt, because it's Airborne Friday, that also happens to be red, because it's Red Friday. And as I went to grab that T-shirt, I thought, nope, I'm going with Point Break. And as I threw the T-shirt on, I thought, why did I grab Point Break? Because I'm running downstairs again. So I thought, with the 5 minutes that I had to spare before we went live on this, I thought I would write down some things that made me want to get this T-shirt on. And boys, when I came in with like 10 seconds to spare before we went live, it's because the last sentence was being scribbled down mere seconds before I hopped into the green room. And so Point Break means a lot of different things to me, but certainly the reason that it is impactful, I believe, for a lot of people is, I'm going to just read the first thing that I wrote down, and that is the tension between conformity and the quest for freedom. And so it is a big topic nowadays, this topic of conform or be free, chase liberty or be a clone. And so the talk is constant. The headlines are constant, but the action isn't afforded against the talk. So the divisive topic of don't be a clone, be free, is the only action that is occurring. The typing is the only action that is occurring. There's no action behind pursuing liberty. And so the movie Point Break, to me, kind of represents the idea that you can have all the thoughts in the world, but until you start applying action, before you start getting out there and skydiving, before you start surfing the world's biggest wave, before you start doing things that are freaking epic, then are you really pursuing your own maximum freedom, your own liberty? And so Bodhi in the movie is the example. He represents to me that free spirit, that person who's chasing enlightenment, that person who is willing to ride the fiery edge of insanity to see something that others aren't, that maybe he doesn't even know are visible or available or are part of this world. And so you've got to push the pace to feel what you can feel in this world. And if you're not pushing the pace, then are you feeling truly what you're capable of? So you can think all you want. You can surf in your head. But until you get out there and get salt in your mouth, get that cold water splash of reality in the face, you're only living the dream. You're not living the life.
Bam. All right, everybody, let's wrap the show up. I think that sums up everything. Beautiful point. Steve, thoughts on Sean's point?
Whew, there's a lot there. It was actually super interesting, coming back to the surf reference for a second. I had a client this last week. Fellow was 53 years old, from the North Shore, was a lifeguard on the beach there for 20 plus years, has his own spot in the lineup at sunset, surfed 40-foot Waimea, like super legit dude. And one of the most enjoyable people I talked with all summer, because we had an opportunity to actually sit and chew the fat, because he's an old timer in his sport. I'm a relative old timer in my sport. And yet there was such a commonality because of the things we have shared. And it's like, I've never had a two-wave hold under at Waimea. I would be dead within seconds. But I've also done some pretty, some hectic things in mountain biking that helped us bridge the gap between the thoughts he was having about his transition into my sport and thoughts I might have about transition into his sport. And it's because of the common language we found, even though they're drastically different, there was commonality in our language. And what that did is it opened a dialogue that was relatively safe to have, because there was no judgment on either of our parts towards each other about the newbie language we were using or about the newbie questions we were engaging with. And so I think that if you find somebody who can become part of your tribe, not because of what you want to be, but because of who you are, I think that creates some really interesting opportunities where thoughts can then turn into action, because you have somebody who's walked a similar line and shares similar language that's welcoming you into their fold because of that common stuff, if that makes any sense. Like if I was to show up on the North Shore and paddle out with Glenn, like he would be the dude. And I had like an hour-long conversation with this guy, but there was so much in common that we had that I would be very comfortable taking him anywhere that I'm riding, because I know he has the mindset to approach those challenges. And likewise, he would probably be okay taking it. He would never take me out Waimea, but he could probably take me out to a baby wave where he lives and feel okay, because he knows I have a mindset for thought into action, as opposed to just paddling into the unknown. And I think that's where, when you think about thought to action, it's like, are you stepping into unknown for unknown's sake, or are you stepping into unknown because you're passionately curious about it? And I think that is what I've always tried to steer people towards, is to have passionate curiosity. That way, when the going gets tough, or if you have a bad experience, or if you take your beats, you're going to get back up because that curiosity is still there. And I think that's an important piece of thought into action as well.
I like where this is going. Gordo, you got thoughts on this?
Yeah, it was my, I wrote it down. I didn't say it, but I wrote stake in the game. So you can't, just like Sean's saying, like, I'm kind of mentoring a young guy right now, and he's like, oh, you're so comfortable talking to people. And it's like, well, and you're comfortable doing this and that. And it's like, I've failed so much because I put myself in those positions and I did it. And then I failed, and then I pick myself back up, and you do it over and over again. But unless you have some sort of stake in the game, then you are just dreaming. You're not actually doing anything with thought to action. You're just thinking, and you're just dreaming, and it's never going to happen. So you have to be able to swallow it and conquer the fear and actually go and get the objective that you want.
Absolutely. Mike, any thoughts? Oh, sorry, I have you muted here. Sorry. There you go.
Sure. Sean said something very interesting, so did everybody else. But, you think about T.S. Eliot, the writer, and he was talking about the wasteland, and he had a lot of fragmented images, right? Poetry and song and everything. So if you read the poem, it's this idea of these fragmented people after post-war Europe, and where do they go? And so they're in existential crisis mode. With The Way Out, Viktor Frankl talked about paradoxical intention, and that's where you have this anxiousness, and this anxiousness cripples you, that the more you think about your anxiousness, you become more anxious. And so this idea of paradoxical intention is that you throw yourself into the situation, that you're so afraid, rather than being more and more afraid, which creates more fear, that your commitment is what takes you out of that fear. Is just jump out of the plane or do whatever you need to do. It's interesting in that you have to have certain values, right? Your view on, well, your attitude, right? How do you see the world? How do you see things? Do you create? For Eliot, it was writing poetry. It was writing plays. It was creating. I think from thought to action is, we see a lot of people who are immobilized. You look at the Fisher King in history, and here's a guy who's supposed to guard the Holy Grail, but he's injured in some way. You can take it as a warrior or some type of soldier of some branch, but here he is, he's wounded in the crotch. So there's this symbol of impotence. With the movie, with Point Break, the character Bodhi, I mean, he's almost like Buddha. He throws himself into the moment, and he spouts out a lot of really cool, sound bites. But here's a person who takes action. He jumps out of a plane. I mean, we just love this movie. We say this guy is transcending all history, all culture, everything, in the sense that his action, it's relatable to anybody, whether you're Canadian or you're American, whether you're a warrior or whether you're a history teacher, whatever it is, we can all understand that, and we all can project our own sense of value into that character. That's my thought.
I like that. That's interesting. Clay, any thoughts on this?
No, I don't. I can't really top anyone. Sounds like, from hearing everybody, that the application it can take different forms, and when I think about what Gordo said, and when I think about who Sean is, and riding mountain bikes, it's all momentum based. So even the smallest application of writing it down first is momentum into taking the thought from the action. I think some of these higher level guys like Sean, they inherently know that the smallest thing can lead you into the momentum of applying the knowledge that you want. And it can start as small as writing it down. But I think for everyone, could be communicating with a friend that's like-minded. But I have nothing to add. I'm just noticing it seems that like application can be important even at the smallest, most minute level.
I totally agree with that one. Steve, you got something?
Yeah, just to follow up on Clay's idea and all of the fellows' ideas here, and Chance, you and I were messaging back and forth on Instagram a little bit, and when you think about application, you're thinking about it in a scale, right? Or I often do, and it's like I've had to learn to operate with a chunk more grace this summer, right? That was the word, Chance, that you and I were kind of messaging back and forth about. It's because, like, for somebody who's struggling with addiction, like Clay may be working with, it's like, imagine how brave they have to be to take a first step, where that first step is mundane or almost expected from us. And working with so many diverse people that I did over the last 3 weeks, like we worked with 172 people from all walks of life, all different countries, genders, and there was some mixed gender stuff this year that was really interesting, and just learning to try to lead with a little bit of grace before responding or before having expectations of anybody, like in terms of fundamentals on the bike. Like, if you don't do your fundamentals well, you are going to hit the ground. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. And then there's a consequence for hitting the ground. You can't escape it. It's universal. But how we help somebody find their way to the fundamentals really needed to have a level of grace shown to it or given to it, because the uptake of information, we call it drinking from the fire hose, just the absolute stimulus overload that's coming in, both physical, mental, emotional, whatever the case may be. And I felt like my craft changed this year, because it was like I just had to take a graceful step back and just let the person process what they were processing in real time, and then give them the opportunity to show immediate growth from that, because I gave them a graceful moment. Like, you can't bulldog anything. Now, if you're a forward-facing operator or somebody in your world that's, I mean, there's a whole bunch of training that comes before those moments. So maybe this conversation, or where I'm taking it, it doesn't have as much application. But in the everyday world that we seem to be encountering nowadays, it's like we can turn people off so quickly as opposed to turning them on so quickly. And it really felt like I had to try to learn to operate with a chunk more grace, so that people are finding their own thoughts, and that leads to their own actions because of my guidance as opposed to my push, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I'm tracking 100%. I think not only with other people, the grace is useful, but having the grace within yourself to make mistakes, to be able to try different things, different modalities, until you find something that works, and then continually explore while using the thing that works as well. Sean, any thoughts on any of this?
Sure do. So building off of what Steve just said, and I'm really glad that you brought that up, buddy. And that is having the grace to be able to step back and let someone, for lack of a better term, flourish into the position that they're trying to move into, whether it's to become a day 3 mountain bike or a professional, or whatever the case is. I think it is good to allow that space. However, on the other end of the coin, you'll get no grace. You're going to get zero grace in this moment, because I need you to grow in this moment in an entirely different way that doesn't require grace. And so there are these extremes of kind of the battle space of operation, where you're trying to either help someone or move someone or teach someone or break someone or build someone. You need a carrot and a stick. You need the left and right. You need the yin and yang. You need the hard and the soft. And so the hard in my world is you're getting no grace, man. In fact, the way that you just kind of looked at me, kind of asking for grace, you just got double no grace. And so consequences, we've mentioned it. If someone is used to holding their hand out, expecting to be lifted up every single time they fall down and scuff a knee, get used to scuffing both knees, because now you're bear crawling. Now you're on your belly crawling until I tell you to stop. That is the way of the world that I was raised in the military and special operations. Is there's a time for grace and there's a time for double no grace. So everyone needs to experience that, in my opinion. Otherwise, you don't have context in life, as far as I'm concerned. Now, I'm going to go back to this little sheet of paper where I was scribbly doing my thoughts. And the very first thing that I put on top here is freedom versus conformity. Now, going back to the Point Break movie, and I don't want to make this thematic, but Bodhi, as an example, to me, represented the transcendence or the pursuit of transcendence, as Mike stated, kind of a virtual Buddha, for lack of a better term, a modern Buddha. He had that feel. He threw out the lines. He had these thoughts. He was expressing himself in sort of like that granola head way, which I really appreciate. And so it's easy to attach to an individual like that thematically within the movie and think, oh, rock on. You know, you kind of vibe with him. You want to be as cool as Bodhi. However, the other end of the spectrum, the other side of the coin, the left and the right of arcs, was Keanu Reeves, Neo, in that role. And he was representing the FBI. He was like not straight-laced or not like so letter of the law that he couldn't see what was going on. But he was there to represent the conformity aspect, the rules and regulations, I'm in here to get my man, and I'm going to do it through the construct of law and order. However, as we all know, when you watch the movie, there is that ebb and flow of conformity versus liberty, interacting with each other and learning from each other in the moment, of course. And so the movie, to me, is a great representation of what's going on in society right now. This idea that a lot of people want freedom, but they're wanting the freedom without the earned freedom of life's lessons. Bodhi, is the example, didn't like wake up at 16 and become Bodhi. He had to grind. He had to grind the granola head life. He had to grind the enlightenment life. He had to go out there and pursue what he wanted to be in order to be it. It doesn't happen overnight. So he was a result of a long pursuit, as I see it. Whereas, of course, the FBI agent was a bit of a journey himself to become what he wanted to be. These two characters playing off each other are, to me, the almost perfect example of conformity and liberty. But the difference between the movie and reality is our reality right now, our current modern society, isn't paying the price for either of these states of awareness. People want to be free, but they're not acting every day to earn their freedom of mind, their freedom of whatever they want to do. They want it now. They're not willing to earn it by 10 years from now. They just want to buy it, not earn it. And so freedom and control is a huge subject that isn't something you can buy at Walmart. It is something you can only buy through your life. And that's years and years and years of figuring out which side of the line you're on, what you want to be on that side of the line, and then pursue it with stubbornness for years.
Bam. This is it's a beautiful point, and I really like where you're going with this, and the fact of, oh, I gotta move my screen over. There we go. This concept of freedom without consequence is a really interesting line to go down. I'm going to go around the table one more time, see if anybody else got anything on this. Let's go with Mike. Or Steve, I'll come to you a second. Mike, what do you got?
Again, Sean said some very valuable information. Now, Bodhi says, if you want the ultimate, you've got to pay the ultimate price. And he is correct. It is this idea of the FBI, right? Johnny Utah, the lunkhead versus, the enlightened individual. And this is not just some new age tosh or some philosophical underpinnings about a movie that's light. It's actually very deep. It's very profound. When you're thinking about it, as they say, freedom is the mother of anxiety. And what happens so much is analysis by paralysis. So many people, they come to a moment where what? Crises. They lose an arm. They have cancer. They get kicked out of the military. Something happens where they are forced to a moment of crises. And they have to then ask themselves, who am I and what do I believe? And it might be something that happens throughout your whole life. You can't always change. You can't change the outcome. You can't change the situation, the circumstances you're in all the time. It just happens. But you can change yourself, how you view that. You know, Frankel talked about it for a good look into that kind of POV. Take a look at Frankel. Frankel said when they're in the concentration camps, they were there in their nakedness. It didn't matter whether you were wealthy or whether you were poor. They removed everything. So there were no illusions. You had to then face life and ask yourself, what is it that you truly believe? And if you knew what you believed, those people who had strong convictions and those people who had imagination, they always thought, what am I going to do when I get out of here? And they survived. But there were those people who died, and you would see them, they would wake up, they would have their last smoke, they would give away their bread, they would give away their pillow, whatever it was, and they would die right there on the spot. And Frankel noted that, wrote about it. And so when you're getting to this thought, here's a person who's a man of action versus a man of thought. Bodhi is an interesting character. He's able to do it. He's able to transcend. I find it fascinating. But as Sean said, he's a man who has done a lot of grinding. He's a man of consistent self-discipline. He's applied his knowledge. He's studied the outcomes. He's refined his approaches, right? And then he has then, after refining, created new habits through that discipline. I find it all fascinating conversation.
Could not agree more. Steve, what do you got?
Yeah, I was just I've spoken about it before on the podcast, but I've just seen so much of it, and this conversation is leading me towards it. It's like, freedom without consequences is entitlement, right? Like there has to be consequences for the things that we have earned, right? Like Sean was talking about this idea of earning it. And I think one of the elements that's so challenging nowadays is that there's so many people that just expect freedom. They just expect comfort. They expect it's not just an expectation. It's that they're entitled to it. Like, who is going to do this for me? How is this going to be provided for me? If it's not handed to me, then somebody else is to blame. And that feels like a real critical piece of the puzzle here. Is that these expectations that people have set now. Albeit whether they are entitled to things or not, if they're living into their entitlement, then how can they possibly grow? Because if something is just, if you're just waiting for the handout, or you're waiting for this moment in time where you're given what you believe to be afforded, then how can you possibly struggle for it? How can you possibly find your way to growth? Because your thoughts are just turned into somebody else's action, not action of your own. And I do want to be devil's advocate for a second here on the Point Break movie, and I'm not trying to knock it. It's a great movie, fellas. But when you look at the Bodhi character, Bodhi to me seems, during the growth of the film, like he seems terribly entitled because all of his bank robberies have been successful. He's never essentially been contested. He's always just gotten away with it and then fled to go somewhere else where he can get away with it again. And that's where, like, there's an interesting duality in that character, because when things where the poop hits the fan for him and things start going sideways and his homies start getting clipped, like, does he actually live into those characteristics that we're speaking about when things go sideways, or does he fold up and run? And I wonder if that's worth exploring a little bit if we're sticking on the movie theme, because to me, it's like, it's sort of this idea of what is Bodhi entitled to? Is he entitled to be able to get away with these crimes? Well, I believe he does through his philosophical beliefs, but then luckily the movie grows and squares him away. And then you see more growth in Keanu Reeves' character, whereas Bodhi's like willing to sacrifice himself because he doesn't want to live into this entitled world that he's created for himself, if that makes sense.
I'm tracking. That's a really great line to it. It brought up the concept of safety for me. I know I've heard this many times where people will say, "Oh, well, it's my right to live in a safe country." Says who? And they're like, safety comes down to your responsibility and whether or not you can actually stand for that safety. I think that's great points that we're bringing up here. Clay, any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think every good story has a little bit of all of us in it. I've actually never seen Point Break. I know of the movie, but I've never seen it. I know. It's
Take it back. Get him off the
I'm so
show.
sorry.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, but I think when we talk about the freedom versus conformity, the people that I work with tend to think that they're free, but they're actually conforming, and that is the most difficult thing to work around. So I like it. It's a difficult concept, but I guess what would we do when we encounter those kinds of people who believe that they're actually free and they're actually conforming. And it's kind of to what he was saying, where the entitlement, I have a running hypothesis. The hypothesis is that the more comfortable a culture and a society gets, then idle hands, right? The more mental health issues that we'll have. If you think you're entitled to safety, it's because you don't know what it means to be unsafe. Right. So there's an entitlement there. And how then do we convince people, other than their own internal guilt, which they should listen to, that they're actually not more free, they're conforming, and they're conforming to the culture and the society, and not to what they feel is morally and ethically correct for themselves. And I think that's the dichotomy of those two characters in a lot of ways. Is, from what I could hear, Bodhi thinks he's free because he's committing all of these crimes, but at the end of it, or towards the end, all of those around him begin to perish because Bodhi isn't actually acknowledging what he's doing wrong for himself. I think that's pretty metaphorical for everyone. And so I don't think that we can do anything to change those people. They're going to have to listen to themselves. That's really what I'm getting at.
I really like where this is going, Gordo. Thoughts on any of this?
Yeah. Point Break's my favorite movie, but I agree with what Clay was saying about how people think they're free, but they're not free. I call it the double matrix. You see all these guys on the internet posting, "Oh, I'm so angry at the government and freedom and this and that," and they're posting and posting and posting, and they don't even realize that they are the slaves to the machine that they think they're rallying against, but they're actually doubled down into it, if that makes sense. The second part, man, Johnny Utah, so Keanu Reeves' character. I like the way that they did the movie with that character, because that's showing the duality of freedom versus conformity, because he wants to do what Bodhi does, and he likes that. He likes the feeling, and he wants it, and he understands it, but he realizes that, hey, real life, he is the real life. He is the law, right? There's nothing more real life than the law. So there are major consequences to what Bodhi is doing and how crazy he's acting, and anybody can do that, but there are also the people that take a little too far and then chase the dragon a little too much, and next thing you know, they're 6 feet deep, or they're in jail for the rest of their lives. So I think if we looked at the movie as a whole, instead of just, oh, it has to be one or the other, because life isn't one or the other. It's how much can you get of freedom while being in the left and right of conformity, whatever that is. And I know people they don't want to be as free as they think they are. It's extremely difficult to do that. And if you think you're free, like what Bodhi's doing, look at all the laws he's breaking. Look at all the people he's hurting. Look at all the bad influence he's putting out. So I think there's a little bit of karma that comes with it.
This is an interesting place. And I was thinking while you were talking there, Gordo, was the fact that I think in the movie, at some point, they're like, nobody's getting hurt because they're not actually attacked. They're not shooting anybody when they're robbing the banks. But that's you're psychologically traumatizing every single person in that bank in that moment, right? Who had no expectation that was going to happen. So you are actually hurting people, just not physically hurting people. And that's a whole nother realm that we can go into as well. Sean, any additional thoughts on this?
I do. And to Gordo's point, I do believe that I've tried to run my life like a mix of the two characters. Like I try to stay fairly law abiding. and I also try to push the pace. And so I'd like to meld the two characters into one in my life. That's generally how I've tried to run my life. And I could build that out for about 4.5 years. But consequences, we're talking about how perhaps society as a whole is moving, not everyone, but is moving generally towards that state of a sense of entitlement, a sense of I'm the center of the universe, and I've got a question to ask, and I'm going to ask it right now, and I don't care if I'm interrupting someone. You know, this center of the universe thing. I experienced it yesterday on the sidewalk in my little town, and it doesn't happen too often. But as I was walking down the sidewalk, this dude was a tourist, because anyone who knows me wouldn't do this. He got out of his car as he pulled up into a parking spot, saw me walking down the sidewalk, walked up and stepped directly in front of me, like intercepted my trajectory to stop directly in front of me to make me stop. And as he stepped in front of me, I was like, what's going to happen here? Are we going to fight? Which is my instant instinct, because I don't know him. He's just a few years younger than I am, a bit of a bigger guy, and he looks like he's used to getting his way. That's how I determined it as I was moving towards him, figuring out what I was going to have to do to him. And so as I stopped, he said, hey, where's the nearest coffee shop? And as I was stepping around him, giving him a side eye sneer, I said, hey, dude, I don't work for you. Next time, try please, excuse me, or do you mind if I ask a question? As I walked around him. And do you know what he did? He did one of these. Did anyone see what just happened? Someone just held me accountable. Like he was so shocked. It was 100%, buddy. He was ready to break out his phone. He was ready to make it a dramatic moment, because he's the most fragile guy on that sidewalk. Coming in big with his demands. And the moment that
Oh, I think we might have lost him. That's we'll get him back here. Oh,
You should let me finish it for him.
Sure, go for it.
And then it was like the garbage I take on every Thursday. I roundhouse kicked him right to the side of his head. I got on my mountain bike. I rode 10,000 kilometers. I went to the other side of the country and back on 0 carbohydrates. The end.
Bam, there you go. Summed it up for us. Thanks very much. Appreciate that. Sean, you're back. You missed a little bit there.
Sorry about that. I guess I locked up. So continuing on with the story, once I moved around the guy and held him accountable, I think that the second thing that I've written down, which is relevant to this topic, as we're just discussing now, the second thing that I wrote down is loyalty versus brotherhood, which is relevant to the movie, of course. I mean, generally, that's what the movie is about. Whether you're part of the brotherhood with Bodhi, or whether you're being loyal to the FBI to some degree, or are you loyal to the... You can spin the words all day long and play them off of each other, but as I see it, in the veteran community, there is loosely this thing called the brotherhood. And are you loyal to the brotherhood blindly, or are you loyal to the brotherhood because it feels right to you? And so, Gordo was talking about how people can double down on the idea that they want freedom, but in yelling about they want freedom, they're actually becoming a slave to the yelling of I want freedom. They buy into the trap that they are now just a clone voice. And so the brotherhood can pull people together for the right reasons, or it can pull people together for the wrong reasons. And so I believe that you can be loyal to yourself, you can be loyal to your friends, and you can be loyal to the brotherhood. But you shouldn't ever be loyal blindly to those three elements, including yourself. And so I like to pattern interrupt myself. I like to pattern interrupt my friends. I like to pattern interrupt the brotherhood. I like to make sure that I have good context with it and it has good context with me. I'm always playing friction with everything around me to better understand that I belong where I belong and it belongs within my life. Because without friction, you never get a good read on is this the way I want to live my life? So loyalty versus brotherhood is probably an important topic in respect to thoughts and actions, because brotherhood can drag you down a thought-based route that isn't action-oriented and get you to a point where maybe you don't want to be. So you've got to keep your eyes wide open.
This is a beautiful line to head down, and I think it aligns quite nicely with the question that I had written down here. I'm going to use that as well, but it brings to mind the concept of what you need to prioritize at any given time. Because are you prioritizing the brotherhood as a concept as to what it means, or are you being held to the idea that you're just do whatever you want as a rote matter of following said brotherhood? It actually reminded me of, I grew up in the 90s, so stay with me on this one, but the goth crew started to come out in the late 90s, and everyone was just like, I'm trying to be different just like everybody else. It's an interesting line. So the question I have for you is, how do you prioritize? Because I mean, we get all kinds of thoughts and ideas, and should I do this? Should I go left? Should I go right? How do we figure out which ones we want to act on, which ideas, which concepts that we want to follow when we have all the ideas in the world? Like, our brains are coming up with all stuff all the time. How do you prioritize? I'm going to start with Clay right now. What do you think?
Oh no, starting with me first. So I'll read the question. How do you prioritize which thoughts or ideas to act on, especially when you have multiple competing ideas? Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, we're so goal oriented that I guess you have to define the goal, or define the means before the ends, I guess. So you have to prioritize, like, what's the goal? What's the overall goal? Identify the goal, write it down, small momentum steps forward towards application. And it starts with defining the goal. I'll leave it general there.
I like it. It's a good start. Gordo, I'm coming to you next while you're checking out your hair.
I'm trying to read the question below this thing. Yeah, I just echo Clay. You have to write it down. You have to write it down. If you want to wrap up brotherhood and loyalty into it, I think that you do have to understand yourself. And to go back to Steve's point about grace, that you force yourself to take the pregnant pause. You force yourself to really deep down and say, hey, is this loyalty to myself, or is this loyalty to someone else, or is this to the brotherhood? And that same with your goals and how you prioritize them. You really have to put thought into it. That comes by writing it down. Nothing's going to hurt it. Seeing all the pros and cons and knowing yourself what is going to be the most beneficial to take care of first and what comes last.
I'm liking this. This is getting succinct. Steve, what do you got?
Yeah, I think it has to check against who you are and what you're hoping to become for yourself. Like, I've found myself asking more and more people, is there an optimal version of yourself that you believe exists? Whether that's around growing your mental emotional health, whether it's your physical health, whether it's a skill-based something. Like, I believe that all of us have a version of ourselves that we would like to see. And when it comes to the brotherhood and loyalty and concepts around such, it's like, in the layman's world, do they even know how to attach to a brotherhood or sisterhood? Because they don't have something to share that, like, they don't have an experience to balance it out. Like, oh, we went through this together, we're now brothers, or we went through this together, we're now sisters. Like, most of the common world, I don't think, has enough experiences like that to really bond onto and to hook onto. So then if they are trying to prioritize thoughts or ideas to act upon, it should be about whether or not it helps them become the optimal version of themselves. Like, does this help me grow? Because if it does, guess who I'm better for? I'm better for everybody. I'm not sure how I ended up with that sort of philosophy for myself, other than, when times have been hard or chips have been down, like, really at the end of the day, who do you have? You have yourself. And that's really what creates opportunities. Like if somebody's walking through Clay's doors to access Clay's services, I'd love to believe that that person at least has a sense of, I am worth walking through this door and starting this conversation, because they're choosing to prioritize a thought like, I'm worth it, so I'm going to take a step. And I don't know, I mean, that must be a really challenging place to be as a person. I can't speak to it because I've never been there, but I know when times have been darker or times have been hard, it's like, what is helping me get better so that I can be better for others? That's been an anchoring thought for me when it comes to this question.
I like it. Mike, thoughts on this?
I'm all over the place. Well, getting back to what Sean said, with Bodhi, he was an archetype, right? So he's a representation of some type of archetype. Robert Moore, the Jungian psychologist and writer, he talked about that in The Magician King, Warrior Lover, and that Bodhi is the magician. But going down to the idea of what life means, I mean, Adler thought it was about a quest for power, and Freud was a quest for pleasure. And Frankl thought it was a quest for meaning. For me, life is about meaning. There are so many people who are unmoored and they're drifting around. So they can experience love or death or whatever it is, beauty, but they have no understanding of what it really is. I've got a buddy I've known 40 plus years, detective, worked on some of the worst Hells Angels cases, sex trafficking, sex crimes, all of it. And I said to my wife, I said, we talk about the same thing all the time. And it seems that he hasn't grown. Not that I have some advanced individual, in the stratum of people, like, you're trying to grow all the time, but it seems to me that it's a broken record. And I said, we've got to shift this relationship here. It's telling the same stories and there doesn't seem to be growth. But for me, it is, how do I find meaningful work and how do I take action? It is through finding meaning in the thought. That's through relationships, right? It's through trying to understand my indecision. It's through trying to find synchronicity and connection with people and events, and through that to develop as a better man. When you look at civilizations, we know there's 80 of them at least out there that we have records for. And if you look at some of the baddest empires out there, the British Empire, the Roman Empire, the Mongol Empire, all these empires stayed together under intense pressure. Now, when you look at countries, cultures that have no pressure, and you look at Austria, for example, a welfare state where everybody has what they want, or Sweden in some way, you have everything you want. You have kids 14, 15, 16 years old who want to kill themselves because they feel that life has no meaning. Everything's been handed to them and there is no pressure. They don't, going back to what Sean said, is you're not going to get grace. You're going to get a double portion of a sock in the jaw. It's kind of like, man up, do the job. There are consequences to the way you think. So for me, it's talking about being moored to reality and not being moored solely to the idea. The idea can be quite bad. It could be communism. It could be Nazism. What is it that you are really standing up for? And for me, it's a lot of common sense concepts, things that are going to continue the human race, things that are going to continue me being able to pay the mortgage and take care of my family. So as much as I want to be Bodhi, I'm probably more like Johnny Utah. As much as I want to be the magician lover, I'm probably more like the warrior, the guy who has responsibilities, and he's at 3% of, the population, that he's a bulwark against evil. That is a pox, and that pox does what? The pox comes and it paralyzes or zombifies all of culture. It's the pox that comes out from the magician that comes and turns society weak into mewing kittens versus lions. And so the warrior is that person who stands at the cliff and he hears the voices and he says, I've got to go that direction towards the din of war, versus like everyone else, the cut and run. And so to cap it off, I think I'm more Johnny Utah as much as I like to be Bodhi. And that's my thought.
I like it. Sean, coming back to you. What do you got?
Man, I like this conversation. So I'll take your question, the specific question, because I'd love to build off of what Mike just said, but I'm going to try to stick to what's written there on the screen. And I think that there are, so you've stated, how do you prioritize which thoughts or ideas to act on, especially when you have multiple competing ideas? When I read that, I think of a branching situation. So we've got this problem over here, which is now it's an immediate problem with consequences that have to absolutely be dealt with now. And I'll give an example of that in a sec. And then the other branching point is I've got a little bit of luxury here. I've got a little bit of time where I can think about all of the varying confluences of ideas and the variables that I can play with, and which calibration I can choose to execute against a problem. If I've got the luxury to deeply consider what's up next, then that's an entirely different situation than bam, I've got a problem now. Or bam, I've got a competing idea now. So I'm going to give a quick case study of the immediate problem right now. My friend Andrew Bovard, who was living in Jasper, the township just went through a terrible fire where about half of the town just burnt down, approximately half of the town. And so Andrew and his partner had to evacuate the town in the middle of the night, do that big drive, end up in an entirely different place than where they used to live. And now they're just trying to figure it all out. So I hit him up yesterday and I said, bro, how you doing? What can I do to help? And he said, man, it's a lot to take on right now. And Andrew is a international level 24-hour solo mountain bike racer that I coached for over a decade. I know him as well as he knows me. And so when he stated that, I simply dropped straight into coach mode. And I said, okay, here's the deal. This is what you need to start executing against. The problem in front of you is just going to be chunked. You're going to move into chunking mode. So look at your feet, figure out what your problem is right now, start delivering on that problem, work on that tiny little chunk. Once that chunk is done, look at the next chunk, and that's how you're going to do the next 2 days. You're going to chunk your way through the next 48 hours. And as you're chunking your way through the problems, I also want you to focus on stay freaking hydrated, make sure you're getting enough calories in, and no matter what, focus on getting quality sleep. And over the next 2 days, things will take care of themselves. Or more correctly, you'll take care of them through chunking. Any questions? Good. That's how our conversation went. And so I delivered that to him, just like I would deliver workouts to him as one of my athletes at one point. And so our relationship is deep enough, strong enough, direct enough that even if his house was burning down, mid-burning down, and he sent me a DM with the problem, we wouldn't hold hands and have a cry. We wouldn't move straight into an emotional disaster. We would look at the problem, say, bing, bang, boom, execute. And that's what would happen. But because Andrew and I have gone through a lot of adversity together, we've gone through the complex problems together, we can simply move into the direct action mode. Whereas for folks who haven't had to be in moments where it is mandatory to instantly get on with the multiple ideas that are running around in their head, if they aren't obligated to execute time and time and time and time again, to understand that there is a way for humans to look at a problem and directly engage with it in a split second, then the world seems really complex and murky, and all these ideas just keep spinning around in their head, and they've got, I don't even know which one to pick. It's because you've never picked one and just got on with it. And so my friend Andrew is now chunking his way through the next 48 hours, easy peasy lemon squeezy, even in a really complex problem. It's made easy by the fact that he's easily moved through these problems time and time again. Historically, he's got a track record of creating solutions in the puzzle. So how do you prioritize which ones to act on? Start acting on anything. Start getting better at acting on things. Randomly cherry pick any problem and get to work on it, solve it. And now you've got a track record of N=1 success to build off of, to get better at prioritizing.
Bam. I like it. Steve, you got some thoughts there?
I do, yeah. And I had not a similar experience, but this summer, my second week of camp, we had 57 kids, my son being one of them. He was involved in our camp, and it was Wednesday of the second week, and I get a phone call on the chairlift, and it's like, hey, my son's name is Gus. He said, yeah, Gus has had a crash. We'll get you more information as we find out more. So I'm in charge of 9 kids in the group and the general manager of the larger group. And in my head, I was like, okay, I don't have time to freak out right now, because me freaking out and becoming less useful to these kids and to the overall program is not going to help anybody. So I just executed because I trust the crew and I know that they're taking care of him as best I can. So I finished the lap and there's an ambulance at the bottom of the road. And I just happened to be riding by and I said, oh, are you transferring Gus Wilson? And they're like, yes, we have Gus Wilson. Who are you? And I said, well, I'm his dad. So I just rolled over to the ambulance. I sent the kids to the tent, roll over to the ambulance, pop my head. I can see his face. He's conscious. He's smiling. I said, head and neck okay? They're like, yes, head and neck okay. Tib, fib possibility. We're transferring him. And I was like, okay. I looked at Gus and I said, Gus, here's your job. You're going to be kind to the people at the hospital. You're not going to call your mom and you're not going to freak out. I said, you're in the best care that you can be in. Dad will be there when I can, if I can. And so off they go. And like I heard one of the paramedics say to the patroller, like, that's his dad. Why isn't he coming with us? Well, I wasn't going with him because I still had a job to do. And I think it speaks to that idea that Sean's talking about taking things in chunks. Like me breaking down and becoming less of myself, or less of myself for the others, more importantly, that doesn't serve anybody. And that certainly doesn't help Gus navigate grit and resilience in a situation where he's a bit banged up. Now, fortunately for us, it didn't end up being anything major, and he was able to continue on. He was more just overwhelmed by the experience. And I think that's, if I'm reading what Sean was saying correctly, that's where it's like we have that opportunity to do it for everybody every day. If somebody's having a fire hose moment where they're taking life in and it's like drinking from a fire hose, we have the ability all the time to just say, hey, 1, 2, and 3. What are the 3 things directly in front of us that we can actually have control over? And that's the key, I think, is that what can we control versus what can't we control? Because spinning our wheels on what we can't control, that's not useful for anybody. It just generally makes the situation significantly worse. And it's like, I think being brave enough and having enough courage to step in for somebody when they're having a bad moment to say, hey, I've got you. Let's go 1, 2, 3. It's certainly better than where they are in that moment, which is spinning out. And I think if a chunk of folks could honor themselves enough to have the courage to step in for other people and say, let me help you with this. 1, 2, 3. How can we navigate this? I've got steps. Then boy, oh boy, wouldn't we be able to put like thought directly into action for a chunk of people every day?
That is a beautiful point. Gordo, you got anything? I saw you writing something down there.
I just wrote down alligator closest to the boat. They used to, like, one guy used to scream that at us all the time, because sometimes you don't have a choice about like compassion and stuff like that. Like for the guys that were in the military, sometimes you don't have a choice. You have to come up with the plan. You need to execute the plan, and if you don't execute the plan, then if it's in training, you're failing, and if it's in real life, then someone's life's on the line. So you have to, just like he said, the chunking part, you have to be able to understand what is the alligator closest to the boat, and you need to have the little part in your brain in the back having some distance, but a lot of the time it's just what's in front of you is how you have to take it.
Yeah. Mike, you got any thoughts on this?
Got lots of thoughts, but going on what Gordo said, leadership. I remember being in Iraq, we had a team leader was told that he was going to be team leader, and he actually was his second tour, and he sat on the floor and cried. And I could not believe it in front of the whole company, about 90 people. I was blown away. So while he was milking it and crying for an hour or more, I just had to walk out of the tent like, what is going on here? Anyhow, he was replaced. Other people ran those missions. It's like, well, who wants to die? Does anyone want to get blown up or shot? None of us do, but you do the job. In leadership, a lot of times, as Gordo said, you don't have a choice. You just do it. But you have to ask yourself when you're making a decision, who's involved? Okay, let's say it's your wife and kids. Who's involved? And you got to make a decision based what's best for everybody. Just like in leadership in the military, you have to take care of your people. And if you take care of people, they'll take care of you. You can't control who's going to die. You can't control who's going to get injured. You can't control the situation out there. So you can focus on your team. Now, sometimes if your team has that relationship with you because you've built it and there's that trust, then they will say, okay, you make the choice and we'll follow you, because they believe that you can execute it and carry it through, regardless of whether it's hopeless, regardless whatever the outcome is, they're going to do that. I do a lot of pros and cons, and I come up with lists constantly. So my list would be thought to action. This is what I want to do. Let's say I want to get a new job, pros and cons for me and my boss, pros and cons for my salary, pros and cons for my career going down the road. That's kind of how I break it down.
I like that. Clay, any thoughts on any of this?
I'm still thinking about the question you had up, and a lot of what people said, they kind of like gave me little points there that each person, every time they say something, I start thinking in terms of answering them. So I have like 5 things I want to get out there. But what it kind of reminded me of, and I think I defer from Sean just a little bit in the fact that, so my theoretical orientation, and Mike brought this to mind, is definitely depth psychology and Jungian. So I oftentimes only think in terms of the individual and not other people. Dr. Jordan Peterson, everybody's probably aware of him, especially Canadians. He's always talking about individual responsibility. So from a depth psychology standpoint, Carl Jung, he said that people don't have ideas, ideas have people. And where that branch splits is that for some people, they're not able to trust themselves. Again, going back to Carl Jung, he had this idea of individuation. You could call it enlightenment or whatever, but there's 12 personalities. Mike hit that a little bit as well. We are all of those personalities across time. And being able to take those multiple personalities and be self-aware, self-awareness, I think, would be the component that we're all talking about here. Is some people don't trust their meaning and purpose. They don't trust their ideas. And so to make a decision on how to go, if you don't trust your ideas or yourself, that's where individual responsibility comes into play. So let's say I am not the kind of person that trusts to take action at all because my ideas sometimes get me into trouble. How does the person deal with that? Well, they don't have a long history of listening to themselves. And that's to the other gentleman's point that was talking about how it's an individual responsibility. So thoughts and ideas, they have to have a component of self-awareness that the idea I'm going to prioritize is the one that keeps reoccurring without me looking for an answer, finding an answer, trying to force the situation. A good idea, you didn't come up with it. A good idea came from somewhere else, and it won't let you go if you have the awareness to pay attention to it.
This is going all sorts of interesting places, and I'm loving this. Sean, any additional thoughts on any of this?
I do. I'm going to, again, cheat with my little cheat code that I scribbledy-doo down just before we came in.
You got to start sending these to me and I can put them up on the board.
Dude, I literally finished it 30 seconds before I jumped into the green room. Almost late. So the search for transcendence and the duty versus personal desires. So based on what Clay stated, that's why I'm pulling this up. Because I think that I think a person should search for transcendence, whatever that means to them. I don't have a clear definition of transcendence, but generally speaking, to me, it means like elevating your understanding of life, moving to a higher order of frequency, whereby you can feel more, see more, know more, be more. That energetic plane of non-mediocrity, let's call it. I am in the pursuit of transcendence that perhaps is less spiritual and is perhaps more meaningful to me anyway. And so my transcendence isn't wrapped around understanding the world around me. My transcendence is understanding things like, why do I write things down on a piece of paper just before I jump into a podcast? I'm trying to understand me through life. And so I think a lot of people out there are just trying to understand life. They're trying to understand why their neighbor cuts their grass on Saturday at 9 o'clock in the morning. These are the kind of things that they're trying to understand, the blips and blops of life that are kind of inconsequential. I mean, you can patternize the world. You can understand that every Saturday your neighbor mows the lawn, and you can drive that into your pattern of the world's understanding. But that's just you understanding the world. And that is not transcendence in my books. Transcendence is me understanding me. So by writing this down just before we came into the potty, I'm not thinking about how to explain that to the world. I'm looking at it thinking, why did I need to write that? Why do I need to talk about that? Why am I who I am? Rather than why is the world what it is? I can't control the world. I can only control my view of the world. And for me to control the view of the world, I have to control the view of myself first. To know me is to know the world, in my opinion. And so the transcendence of the moment, I think, is a pursuit that people just don't even consider. They simply worry about what time their neighbor's going to start up the lawnmower on a Saturday because it's going to bug them, because it's going to disturb my coffee. Every Saturday, he does the same thing. The focus is on the world incorrectly, when the focus should just be on becoming a better person. And so how do you do that? Well, again, duty versus personal desires. I think that it's our duty to understand that we're supposed to become a better human being for ourselves. And by doing that, then your personal desires can be met. If you are duty bound to become a better person. And so what's the outcome of that? The outcome is that people get to see you become a better person. And maybe they don't understand how you're becoming a better person. And maybe you don't understand how you're becoming a better person. But the job is to become better so that others can see there's a way forward. And then maybe in time, you get some enlightenment and you figure out a way to help others understand that if I can do it, you can do it. And I think that that's the biggest duty we all have, is to do our best, but not just live an isolated or solitude life where you become the Jedi Master who can levitate in front of the waterfall and no one gets to see it. Who gains from that other than you? I think our duty is to become better so that others can see you can become better.
I really like where this is going. It reminded me of, well, two examples, but the first one, we see this in movies all the time, especially really B movies. Whenever something crazy happens and one of the characters like pulls out a bag of chips and starts eating, and someone's like, how can you eat at a time like this? And it's like, well, I'm hungry. And it's just like knowing yourself that well to just act upon what is necessary in those moments. But I read this story in an article many years ago, and it was talking about how a person used to meditate. He went to like Tibet and learned to meditate with the monks, and did with the whole spinning noisemakers and all those things in the temple, and got used to the sounds and the ohms and the ahs and all the things of when they were meditating in the temple. And he went back to the city and spent an exorbitant amount of time just constantly going, oh man, I can't meditate here because the noises outside and the trucks and the honkings and the horns and the sirens, and I can't do it. I just don't understand. And until he had a moment of revelation that the noises are just your inception of that, what that noise is to you. Is it a bothersome thing, or is it just another thing that you can use to practice that meditation? And eventually he got to a point where he was able to use the external noises to allow him to move into that meditation. But I think to your point, Sean, is that we have to explore our own ranges through all these things, and then develop our own idea, but then share it with the world. I can't That's why I got the podcast started. That's why when I started podcasting in general was just like, I kept hearing people tell me, oh, this is how I did this particular thing. I overcame this obstacle. And they just had it, this little bit of information in their own mind that they weren't sharing with anybody else. And I was like, nope, that's not happening. We're sharing this with the world. Any additional thoughts on any of this? Gordo, I'm going to put you up first. You're next. You're up top. What do you got?
I put, well, one, you are in control of yourself. Like, your sphere of influence ends at your fingertips. Maybe a spouse, maybe your kids a little bit. But if you're thinking that you got some sort of inside track on anybody else other than you, then you're wrong. With going back almost like to the grace thing again that Steve was talking about, like, that is a form of leadership when you say you had to take a step back in your growth, but like, that's a step forward because that's a choice that you're making to take that pause and let it happen, which is a huge growth point for yourself. With the meditation guy, same thing, right? Like, he's choosing to hear those sounds. It goes back to yourself. Like, you are in control of how you feel, of how you react to something. That is the only thing you're in control of. You can't control of what happened, the sounds, anything like that. You're in control of how you want to let that affect you. I find with psychedelics, when I talk to guys when they're about to step off to go do them at wherever, a lot of guys have a hard time with letting go and not having control, and a lot of trauma is based in control and safety, but especially control, especially for operators or guys been overseas. Like, you need control. Psychedelics are the opposite of that, and you need to be able to like let go and succumb to it. Just release, let it go, surrender. That's the word. And surrender to it. And when you do that, that translates into life. And it's sad, and it's so hard to do. And it is sad because you realize, like, oh my God, it is really scary because I don't control anything. But the moment that you surrender to that and you realize, man, like, life is crazy, and there's a lot of different things going on that you have zero control over, you also gain so much freedom with surrendering that and realizing that, hey, man, I am in control of myself. I'm in control of how I want to respond to this, and I want to control how I want to interpret and how I want that to affect me. And that's all based on your own decision of control and how much you want of it. And you don't have that much. And it's hard. It's very hard to deal with, to say that out loud and even to yourself. But the moment you realize that, man, life is crazy, and as much as you want to control everything, you can't. It's maybe not fate, but you are being a slave to the world if you are just being controlled by everything and letting it adjust your emotions and your actions.
100%. Mike, any thoughts on this?
Lots of thoughts again. Sean had me thinking instead of Gordo, just really that we have to understand what our personal desires are, and we don't always act on them. I knew a guy who was impulsive. I mean, he would run into a place, bend a girl over and give her a kiss on the lips like in a John Wayne movie, and pay the price with her husband punching him in the back of the head. But he was impulsive. He would do things, throw rocks at cars, whatever it was. He always acted on this strange impulsiveness, which is just simply dangerous. When I look at those who are trying to balance that, right? You look at someone like Jack Kerouac or Steinbeck or Hemingway. They all loved this country. They loved America and they loved the world. But Jack Kerouac getting to that point of what Sean was saying, mowing the lawn. Why does someone do that regularity? But Kerouac said, because in the end, you won't remember the time that you spent working in the office or mowing the lawn. Climb that goddamn mountain. And for him, he was a person that when you look at some of the videos of him in his older life, it wasn't that he was just this freeborn beatnik, but that he loved this country so much that he wanted to see all of it before he died. And he did that. And he wrote a book about that. And whether he died of, alcoholism or not, the point here for him or someone like Hemingway was Hemingway knew that things were going to be taken away from you. And he didn't like that. And so he took action. He said, I'm going to live my life on my terms. When I look at my own life, I can't lecture people on how to live their life. I do it for what's best for me, hoping my end goal is to impact society, to leave a legacy. That's not my total goal, but it's how do I transcend? How to become a better person? Sadly, to me, and I've written about this a lot, is that the sober-minded man of today, that's a industrious, hardworking man, he's not a sexy person. He's not anything. That sober-minded man who pays the bills and, takes care of his family, he is not liked. He's a representation of a dead or sterile person. And it's the anti-hero today. That person who has no loyalty to anyone. He's a nomad that belongs to no country, has no rules, has no idea, has no identity. And his identity is always, changing. It shifts. He's the worst kind of person because he's loyal to no creed, no man, no country, nothing. And I think in the end, what really comes down to is that the heroes of tomorrow are not the heroes of yesteryear. And when we look at traditional societies, that they succeeded and they still impact us today, like the Greeks or the Romans, there were ideas that came out of that we still have and we still keep, For me, in the end, it comes down to really trying to be the best person I can. And that is through practicing kindness all the time, even if I don't want to. Finding meaning in my relationship with people and loving other people. And I think that's something that's very transcendent across all history, across all cultures, across everything. Because the pursuit for most men, I can't speak for women, but it's power and it's money and it's fame and it's more sex. And those are really empty. There's nothing. Those are vacuums. Those are, whirlpools that'll suck you down. And so for me at the end, how my thought turns into action is, can I do it in such a way where I'm trying to find that balance between my own personal desires and fulfilling the desires and needs of people, whether it's my wife, my country, and civilization, society.
Yeah. Clay, any thoughts on this?
No, I like hearing everyone else. I like where Sean's kind of going with the transcendence aspect of it, because a lot of times thought to action for me is almost like it's like finding some kind of information or something that like broadens the paradigm of the world that I thought I lived in, but there's actually more to that world. And so when I broaden my paradigm, then my thoughts kind of start veering towards action in some way. But one paradigm is something that I've been thinking about or thought about in terms of transcendence. Is there's a quote over Mount Athos monastery in Greece, and it's if you die before you die, you won't die when you die. And I think what they're referring to is that there's small ego deaths, and transcendence could be as simple as small ego deaths daily or small paradigm shifts daily. And so that individual responsibility is to always try to open your paradigm of what you think the world is to be something better, to get better, as Sean put it. And that paradigm search for new paradigms is where we have little small pieces of transcendence that are the self understanding that the answer is always in the question, right? That's that paradox. I don't know if you guys watched Elon Musk and Jordan Peterson, but Elon Musk put that out there. He believes in the answer is always the question, and it's just having better questions. And I thought that was really interesting. But the individual is in pursuit of meaning, which to me is operating under new paradigms daily and destroying the ego in little pieces at a time, the small pieces of transcendence. Yeah.
How do you eat the transcendent elephant? Little pieces at a time. Steve, you got any thoughts on this?
Well, you guys are firing me up. I want to come back and I just want to pose the question, like when did it become bad to be selfish? Right? Like we hear the word selfish and it very often has a negative connotation, that word. And I think selfishness is mandatory, because you can only become selfless after you've been selfish for quite some time. I mean, Sean's talking about transcendence and transcendence of self. And I too feel like an aligned thinking with that. Like somebody said to me a little while ago, they're like, you really don't care what people think about you, do you? And I was pretty happy to say, I think I'm at a place where I really don't care. Like if somebody vibes with what I'm doing, great. If they don't vibe with what I'm doing, I hope they're honest with me and tell me that so that I have that information. So then I can step into the next phase. And Gordo was, I don't want to speak for Gordo, of course, but I think when he was talking about surrendering, the idea of surrendering, I've sort of manifested the idea of forgiveness. Like forgiveness for me is mission critical to the whole operation, because only if you can forgive do you have the ability to then step out of something and look at it for yourself and go, okay, what is my role in this? Right? Like if I can forgive my emotions towards somebody else, or I can forgive somebody else's actions because they were in a bad place when they executed on those actions towards me or towards a scenario or whatever it is. If I can forgive that, then I can sit with myself and I can actually go, okay, what was my role in this? Did I contribute to this? Was I the dude I was supposed to be? And then that's when I become selfish and I look into myself and I go, okay, how do I do this better for me? Because then if I grow, then I'm better for others. And then this idea, like to me, the selfish to selfless transition becomes almost automatic. And I think like if we can move through every day and be a better version of ourselves through being selfish, like taking the time to sit with ourselves and going, man, was I the a-hole in this? I had this conversation with myself the other day, and guess what? I was the problem, but I wasn't able to forgive in the moment. Feelings got elevated, but the key is that I stepped away from it. I went for a walk and I was like, okay, who's the a-hole here? And guess what? It was me, because I wasn't in a place to be the right dude for my own reasons. But once I forgave myself for that, and then once I forgave the other person's reaction to me, that's when I was able to go, okay, Steve, get your head out of your ass here. And then I was able to make an amend for it. I was able to go back and say in the conversation, look, this is on me. I wasn't the dude, but here's how I'm going to grow from it. Here's how I'm going to change for it. I'm going to do better. And I really want our listeners to, like, it's okay to be selfish. It really is. And I think you almost have to be selfish so that you can transcend things for yourself. And then it opens you up to that idea of forgiveness. And then I think those two things work hand in hand, whether it's a paradigm or a continuum. I don't have the language for that, but it's like, I think it's mission critical for us moving forward.
It is a consistent dichotomy, like everything else we have on the collective. It depends, really. Just John, you got any thoughts on any of this?
I do. I've gone through a little bit of a paradigm shift myself over the last probably year or so, and so I'll use myself as the example that I still am a pretty focused person, a driven person, and I have accomplished a fair bit, I suppose, in my life, but out of the limelight. And so I was being selfish in a sense, to your point, Steve. I was being selfish in achieving the things that I wanted to achieve. And so I always found a way to accommodate people around me. Of course, my family, when I was pursuing world champion in 24-hour solo mountain bike racing. I mean, that's no small undertaking. There is some sacrifice within the family. You do have to spend a lot of hours on a bike to kind of move towards that trajectory. And so these were conscious decisions that I had to make that, man, I'm going to tuck my kids into bed tonight, and then an hour later, I'm going to be riding my bike in the pitch black for another 4 or 5 hours. And then I'm going to get up with my kids and get them to school. So you make these sacrifices willingly because you've sat down and thought about what price am I willing to pay. And so for me, my selfish journey is always about how much am I willing to absorb as a sting? What am I willing to pay as a price in order to get to a point that I need to get to learn the things that I need to learn? How much will I take on? But then I always consider the people around me. And it's that risk reward. It's that versus. And so I haven't always done it right because I tend to get target locked on achieving outcomes over a period of time. And so I believe that you've kind of got to do it wrong from time to time to learn how to do it better for the future. And we're all, it's not like we're all carved in stone and you learn your lesson and then you never have to learn that lesson again. I mean, my life has been ebbs and flows of mistakes. And so I don't just one and done learn a lesson. Sometimes I have to learn it 10 or 20 times, 10 or 20 years from now. So we're not all carved in stone, and the lessons will always hit us in the future, but it's what we do with them. And so for me, as the example, as I've pursued what I've pursued, I've had to understand that the actions that I take for myself, there has to be a secondary spillover or tertiary spillover, so that as focused as I am, I know at some point people are going to benefit from that. Because sometimes you just have to draw it all in like a laser beam and almost ignore all the white noise around you to get to where you want to get. But then I tell myself, there's going to be outcome for others once I'm finished this, or there's going to be benefits to others. There's going to be lessons that I'll learn on this laser trajectory that is hellacious, that others will be able to pick up what I'm putting down months or years from now. Kind of like podcasting. Had zero interest in doing it. Still freaks me out to some degree, but not as bad as it used to. Entering into podcasting was unbelievable, man. Maybe the hardest thing I've ever done. But now that I'm nearly 1,000 in, I see the benefits of it. I mean, this panel is an obvious benefit. So no matter what you're facing as the sacrifice, no matter what the sting is, you've always got to tell yourself that somewhere down the road, this is going to be beneficial to not just me, but others. And I focus on the other aspect.
This is it's a very interesting way to go with this, and I'm drawn back to Point Break, and I keep looking at your shirt, Sean, and the thing that kind of clicks back in my head is, we were talking about this earlier with Bodhi being kind of selfish, being kind of entitled, that kind of concept of, he wants something, he just goes and gets it. And it made me think of in movies where there's a montage, right? They need to do the thing, they need to do the training, then there's the event. And the training montage, I think, what most people want, versus the actual grind of it all, like you said, Sean, of the sacrifices that you have to make in order to get to the event before you even do that. But I think the average person, I know I used to want this a lot, was, I'd love to do this, I'd love to be that, I wanted to do these things, so on and so forth. They were just thoughts, but I always envisioned it as a montage. Oh, well, I just gotta let things happen, and then, the montage will take me to where I want to be, and then bang, I'll be there. And it's just not true. And you made me think of a line that changed my trajectory very early on. This happened, I'd say, about 3-4 years ago. I just started podcasting, and it hit me like a friggin' ton of bricks, and it was, the lessons will be repeated until they are learned. And I did not understand that for my entire life up until that point. And then it hit me. And then I started to like, oh, well, what are the lessons? Oh, well, where are the lessons? How many lessons are there? And it opens up that world of self-exploration and self-growth. And how many times have I stopped drinking? How many times have I drank too much? How many times have you start to explore it from there. It's a wonderful place to go. Gordo, any thoughts on anything that we've said so far?
I think things are easy to say, but hard to do. Just like the montage thing, it's a grind, and no one wants that. Goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Everyone's kind of feeling like they could buy it, but you can't. And then, I think that's it for now.
Raj, Mike, any thoughts?
Yeah, I don't prefer the word selfish, but I understand that you have to look at some type of self-care. I mean, we admire the Mavericks, right? We admire the rule breakers. When we look at Napoleon, for example, he says he's going to conquer the world, For me, I have to look at relationships as a Venn diagram. It's not binary. It's not me, and then on the other side, society, or me and my wife, and this is the way it's going to be. So I understand. I believe I understand what you're saying as being selfish. I would say that we should be a little more what's the word, philanthropic, or unselfish, or maybe not unselfish, thoughtful. When I think about, for example, free thinkers, and we look at Steve Jobs, I mean, he was a pretty selfish person, but he accomplished so much. And then he was quite generous as he got older. And I don't know if that's an age thing. I think it might be that you are young and aggressive. You're out there and you want to change the world. And as you get older, you pass your knowledge, you impart your knowledge to people, what you've come up with. When you look at Thales or Xenophanes, they rejected Homer and Hesiod and how they saw the universe. They said, no, that's not how the gods created the world. Sometimes you have to just step up and say, this is not how things are going to be. And you have to take that risk. You have to find also a partner that can help you get there. For me, I have to say that I separated from the military. It was very difficult for me to separate from my love. My wife wanted to support it, but we looked at the children and said, this is probably not the best choice. We're probably going to end up in divorce. It's going to be a rough go. And then I had to reconstitute myself in a different form and figure out where I was going. So if you can have a relationship with society and your friends, family, and familiars in such a way that's a Venn diagram, and sometimes there's ebb and flow. It's not this strange dichotomy. It's this ebb and flow. You're this interrelation. I think that's quite good. I think about people who are quite selfish. There's this episode of The Twilight Zone where Burgess Meredith is a librarian, right? And there's this atomic war, and at the end, he says books and books and books and books. All he wants to do is read books. Well, he's got eyeglasses, and he sits on the stairs, and he has all these books around him, and everything is just blown to hell. And then his glasses fall off and break. And that's the end of the episode. He cries because he can't read these books. And it's just him, the last surviving man on the earth. I think also in a sense that people who are doing things in a very selfish way, who are so self-directed with no care concern, they are either sociopaths, psychopaths, and that it's almost masturbatory. You're fulfilling your own desires and not of anyone else's. So I think there is this give and take. Like Gordo said, it's not easy to do. We can talk about it, and there's that balance. And we can torment ourselves on how to get there. So I think friends, family, and familiar, those people can sometimes be those road signs that point the way and say, hey, you need to readjust. For me, when I get ornery, when I get irritable, my wife knows. There's this, hey, we've been married long enough. She looks at me and says, you need to go for a run. And I say, okay, I'm going to put down everything and I'm out of here. I'm going to go hit the beach, do my run, come back, and I look at a problem, thought to action, and getting away and listening to music and going for that run helps me de-stress and see life, and in a way, this panoramic view, not with myopia, not with a scope so small and narrow, but this wide panoply, this wideness, and I see the synchronicity and connection with other people.
Yeah. My wife does the same thing. She'll be like, you need to go take 5 minutes. And I'll be like, okay. I've learned. Clay, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'll be kind of quick. So it's kind of compounding off Mike. I think a lot of times I like to think about which direction words usually go, because sometimes I don't think that people take a lot of consideration into words that they're saying, especially when they're calling other people something. So selfish is usually something that's either thrown at you or that you're sending at somebody. And a lot of, so in that regard, I have to think about, well, why do I usually call someone selfish? And a lot of times it's because they're, to Mike's point, they're usually ignoring clear and obvious facts for their own benefit, which helps no one. And someone that's being selfless is they're considering everyone else for everyone else's benefit, including what they need to do. Sometimes what we need to do may be for our own benefit, but also for the benefit of everyone else. And that distinguishment between the two, I think, is important a lot of the times. So, but yeah, I'm just kind of compounding off Mike on selfish and selfless.
I like it. Steve, any additional thoughts?
I think that if we have the courage, because we care about somebody enough to tell them what they don't want to hear, I think there's a lot of value in that as well. If it's posed in the right way. Over the last stretch of weeks, there was a good friend of mine who I've known for 20 plus years, who's a very strong personality, very strong character. And that's what I find quite admirable about him, and the way he executes on his business and his personal life. But there were some bumps in the road where some others were unhappy with how he was executing. And the problem was they didn't bring it directly to him. It did the classic thing where it got brought up to somebody else, and then that fire gets lit, and then he hears about it secondhand. And I'm just listening. I'm just sitting and letting him vent and listening. And then he said to me, he goes, am I these things that they're saying? And I said, are you ready to hear the truth? And his kind of face got a little nervous, and I was like, I'm only saying this because I care, but here are elements of what they're saying that actually I have seen myself to be relatively true. And that's not an easy conversation to have. And it took a lot of time to navigate that conversation, where I was able to give examples, concrete examples, where maybe what was being said actually did manifest and did show itself. And then we had a lot of conversation about potential growth opportunities from that. Like, how can you now re-engage these people, take ownership of the actions that they're referring to, and then ask for some grace in how to be more aware of behavior or how they need you to communicate. And I think that having a solid team around you, or having a solid crew around you, where somebody would be honest and transparent with you and say, yeah, you know what, this is what you need to hear right now, even though it hurts. I think there's a big piece of the conversation that we're having around thoughts into actions, where it's like you have to make a courageous step for somebody to like express your care for them. And it's going to be uncomfortable, and you're going to have to lean into it, chances are, which I had to lean into it and sit in the pocket. But the reality of it is, I think the outcome of that scenario is far, far better than it could have been if he had just been defensive and guarded about the whole thing, as opposed to having somebody stand him up a little bit and be like, no, like, here's some realities. Are we ready to grow from this? So that's all.
I like that. Sean, any thoughts?
Yes, thoughts and actions. So something that I see that's very common out there, and that is everyone's got lots of thoughts, and they like to write them up on the internet and then move right along until the next day when they've got more thoughts, and they're going to write those up, and then the next day, and wash and repeat. So it's a pile of thoughts that aren't connected to actions, or no demonstration of action. And so what I've tried to do over the last little while is just introduce people to my life of thoughts and actions. And I don't plan my day around an action that I construct in my mind as a contrived moment to flare out to the internet to show them I can do push-ups, bro. I've been doing push-ups for a long time, but up until a little while ago, the internet didn't get to see that. And so how much to show of action and how much to show of thought? And so I don't think that there's a perfect equation for everyone to use universally. I think it's very much dependent on the individual and how comfortable they are by putting out just thoughts, or just putting out action, or putting out both in a way that plays off of each other. And I think the only way that you can figure out what's best for you is to start playing with the model of thought and action, demonstrating it to others. So if all I ever did was write, and people were tracking what I'm doing, at some point, I believe people who track what I do would start to think, that dude only ever writes and eats and sleeps and has no action. And so then I feel like perhaps I would become maybe more of a avatar than a real human. So I'm saying that because to be a human, you have to somehow support your thoughts by demonstrating it through action. Now, how to do that well? Someone hit me yesterday. Someone who follows me, a young fella, he just finished up his recce patrolman course, and he was trying to decide whether he wanted to be, what's the next play? What's the next move for him? Should he go sniper, or should he go pathfinder, or should he go to JTF2 is generally the question. And so I hit him with a few questions. We went back and forth a little bit. But here's what I ultimately it came to. He was perhaps a bit like me, has imposter syndrome. And so he has accomplished certain things, but it's hard to sometimes accept what you've accomplished and own them. And so what I said to him was, hey, listen, you need to start getting after it, but you need to start getting after it in a trajectory that you're demonstrating to yourself that you are kicking ass. And he said he struggles with his self-confidence, and that holds him back from really going all in. So I said to him, hey, listen, there's a new Netflix documentary that just came out. It's called Sprint. I've only seen 2 episodes. It's a 6-episode series, and it's about the men and women who are in the 100-meter dash for the Olympics. And their characters, man, every single one on the show is a boss. Like, they're large and in charge. They are ass kickers to the 9th degree. So how do you push the pace? How do you even know how far a human can push the pace? Watching a show like that, you'll understand that there are humans, and then there are different kinds of humans. And until you start exposing yourself to that level of way different, almost alien species type of human, you don't know what you're capable of. You've been held back by the idea that society projects to you that mediocrity is okay. Be comfortable with your life. You're living a good life. I don't believe that to be the case. I believe that life is to be lived to the maximum so that we can explore our potential. A show like Sprint will teach you that humans we're unbelievable. Our abilities are insane if you take it for what it is. But very few people explore, even research explore, what humans are capable of. So what I told him is this: hey man, this is how I've lived my life. I ebb and flow between confident and cocky. You've got to have a little bit of swagger in your life. It doesn't mean that you've got to walk down the sidewalk with your oil drum cans underneath your arms so that you're large and in charge. It just means you got to have some swagger, just a little bit, in your head, in your actions, how you hold yourself, how you move through the world. Have a little bit of swagger. Doesn't mean you got to be all up in everyone's grill, but you got to find a way to pursue life hard enough that you get a sense of swagger confidence. And then it's for you to move back and forth on that line of overconfident, overcocky, underconfident, undercocky. You've got to figure that out. But you can't play that ebb and flow game to keep pushing your envelope unless you go out and do something that's super freaking hard and super freaking legit so that you gain that sense of self-confidence. What does that mean to anyone? If you've never done a push-up before, set a target to do 100 push-ups by the end of this month. Bam, now you've got swagger. Now you've accomplished something. Now you can start self-believing in the fact that you can put your mind to something and make it happen. That's what I encouraged him to do. That's what I would encourage anyone to do.
This is a great point. Interestingly enough, it brought up the concept of being a SME, subject matter expert, right? You never want to call yourself a subject matter expert, but other people can call you a subject matter expert, right? Instead, if you ever refer to yourself as the SME, well, then most people are going to kind of doubt it. But if somebody else were like, hey man, yeah, that guy's if you need something about this particular thing, go see that. It also brings up the concept of, my wife's done a couple of half marathons just recently, and you can tell the first timers, the people who have finished for the first time in their life, and they have this look of sheer, I might almost go to the point of enlightenment in that just like a half second of like they accomplished the big thing, that big goal that they've been looking forward to, and they get that little bit of swagger, and then they can carry on. Any other thoughts on any of this? I still got a ton of questions, but anybody got anything else on anything that Sean just said there? Steve? No?
I just if any of our listeners are parents and are raising youth or mentoring youth or working with teens, just the swagger one is a very, very fine line to tread amongst youth nowadays, and I absolutely want to see it exist. Like, I think that if a teen can walk through the world feeling not only like they fit, but like they have some ownership of what they've done, I think that that pays huge, huge dividends as they navigate young adult life. It pays huge dividends as how they belong to a team in their employment when they end up with a job. It's like swagger is a very, very important thing, and it needs mentorship and it needs handling with care for sure. I just saw a study. I won't be able to reference the author of the study, but there was a person who studies men's mental health, and in particular young men's mental health. And what they did was they looked at sort of a meta-analysis of 4,000 young men who had made tragic choices for themselves, but it was 4,000 young men who left literature behind for family members or just members of their circles. And based on the study, what they found, there was 2 words that were in common almost universally across all 4,000 people, and those words were useless and worthless. And imagine walking through the day, every day, feeling useless and worthless, when our male spirit, and I'm being gender specific here for a moment because I feel like it is programmed into us, like males need to be useful, and that usefulness then leads to a sense of worth. Now, if swagger becomes a word that we can use attached to it because we've executed on something well, or we've developed a real talent, or we've developed a skill through hard work and through perseverance and through grit, I can't imagine there's a person listening who wouldn't want to say that they feel useful and worth, and they have worth, a sense of self-worth. And so for those youth that are out there, or for moms and dads who are listening and interacting with their kids, be a demonstration to your kids of usefulness and worth by growing yourself, by doing things that show a little bit of swagger, right? Like, even with my son, who's going to surpass me riding wise in the next year, but for sure he will, based on his trajectory. But it's like, I put down a heater with him the other day, and I was like, don't forget where your dad comes from. Like, don't forget that dad still can take a bite here and still kind of be the dude. And it was like funny navigating that conversation. We were driving back to the cabin because he's like, Dad, he's like, I haven't seen you do that for a while. And I was like, well, maybe you're right, but it's important to remember that Papa's in charge. Like, whether you call that swagger, whether you call it whatever it is, confidence, it's important for him to see, though, that I still have some use and I still have some worth, and I can still open it up in that context. But then we had a conversation about how that spills into bigger things, because that's my job as a dad, is to make sure that we're applying the concept to kind of big picture thinking of how we live our lives as Wilsons. And so I just want to make sure that be like, for the adults that are listening, like, be a role model, be a demonstration of usefulness and worth to your sons and daughters, because it's really gonna give them permission to have some swagger, and it's gonna give them permission to be okay feeling a sense of pride. Because nowadays, it's like with youth today, if you look at any of the social media stuff, we celebrate failure so much more than success. Like, it's our default mechanism to watch fail videos on YouTube versus people executing with success and purpose. And like, that's why skateboarding is still such an amazing sport, because you watch any of the they're called My War on YouTube. Like, Thrasher puts out this series called My War, and it's somebody trying to execute on a trick, and sometimes it takes literally weeks to execute on something with perseverance, and they're taking their beaters and they're getting up and doing it. But I think that mentality of like, let's strive for success before we default to failure. And then, because celebrating failure is yes, is there funny moments where you have a laugh with your buddies if somebody does something that's ridiculous? Sure. But we can't make that the default. We have to find our way towards this swagger and this success, and because it leads to usefulness and a sense of worth. And I feel like it's important.
Yeah, I totally agree. Worth is a big concept, and we have hit it a number of times. Like, we're probably due for another episode pretty soon. Gordo, any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah. If you're not first, you're last. That's the biggest one, to what Steve was saying there at the end. Act in non-verba. Don't tell people your goals. Just do it. More talk, more walking, less talking. If you really want to figure it out, that's how you do it. You put yourself out there. You fail, you get back up. You fail, you get back up. You fail, you get back up. It's about the man in the arena. It's about putting yourself out there. You want to talk about swagger? Swagger is when someone fails, does the Thrasher magazine war of the skateboard trick, right? That is swagger. And there's no better way that you could give someone confidence or inspire confidence than to tell them to go out and do that. And I see it a lot, especially with younger people, and they're just not doing it. So do it. More walking, less talking.
Reps. Get those reps in. I like it. Clay, any thoughts on any of this?
Are these my final thoughts? Because I have a good thought that I want to ask. But if this is like the end of it, then
Oh no, hit it. What do you got? What do you got?
all right. So this is, again, I'm parsing this out as we're all talking, so you guys take it for what it is. So Sean actually made me think of it, and I'll explain. So thoughts to action is the process of learning how to trust yourself. All right, so I'll explain. So I say that in a way that trusting yourself is not necessarily the default, right? We tend to think like, oh, just trust yourself. Of course I do. With addiction, there was this thing, they would come in and they would always have this grudge against other counselors being like, one way to really beat addiction is just to love yourself. And they're like, well, how do I do that? What do you mean? Just go love myself. And so trusting yourself, loving yourself, let's just put it there, is belief. Again, I always reference Dr. Peterson because y'all are Canadians, and also he's an amazing thinker. Belief is acting as if something is real. So if you trust yourself, you're acting as if you are worth trusting. And what that does is that takes time. It takes time because the actual default is to deceive ourselves. Someone mentioned John Steinbeck. He wrote East of Eden and To a God Unknown. And a big part of it is that we're constantly in this state of self-deception, but also good. So we are a living paradox of good and evil. And once you understand that, it should be hilarious, right? So the process of trusting yourself and learning how to trust yourself is the process of taking actions. It's taking your thoughts to action by listening to what you know that is right, and then acting upon it and getting that feedback, getting that data, and just repeating that process openly over and over and over again. Because if you can't trust yourself, then how can you ever really truly take advantage of any action that you would pursue? So I'm curious what you guys think about that.
Let's go back up the line with this one. Mike, I'm gonna hit you first. Any thoughts on that question?
I wanted to get actually on another point, but we can go back to that one. I was just going to talk about.
I'm sorry, man.
No, it's okay. It's my train of thought was somewhere else. We've actually made swaggering almost a sin for young men today, and when we look at the old heroes of yesteryear, was guys like James Coburn or Charles Bronson or something like that, Burt Lancaster, Robert Mitchum. These guys were cool, and we liked them for that. And then there was a shift, and that shift was the drunken barstool poet, and that was Richard Burton, or Peter O'Toole, and these guys were skirt chasers, and Richard Harris, and all they did was drink, Guinness and run around and cheat on their wives and smoke cigarettes, and they were kind of a femme almost in a sense. And now it's even shifted even more, which is kind of like the beta kind of male, kind of a hybrid, and it's kind of like the Ryan Reynolds to Hugh Jackman, which we don't have that throwback to the cowboy. Now, that doesn't mean that these are real people. These are archetypes in Hollywood, and Hollywood largely creates a persona that are a script writer, or many script writers come up with this idea, and then that is posited into the universe, and everyone adopts it and says that's what a man is, when really that's not really what a man is, but we like it, we adore it. And that's just my thought on that swaggering should be good. The problem is today we are in a culture war. I don't want to get into the gender war and everything else, but what I'm saying is that there are dampeners put on young boys today. There are dampeners for a child to want to grow to be a confident man that is out there changing the world. And he's largely a boy who can walk many blocks not knowing how strong he is and how youthful he is, but he's just exuberant, enjoying the world. That's the young man that I think we need. Getting to your point, I didn't even pay attention. I apologize. I was just thinking about my point. But if you wanted to re-ask the question, reframe it for me, I'll try to answer that. Or we can move on to the next guest.
So it's actually almost exactly like what you're saying. So it was thoughts to action is the process of learning how to trust yourself. But what you said is exactly it, and what Sean said too, right? Swagger. What is swagger? What is this confidence? Someone mentioned the skateboarder. I think it was Sean. To be able to trust yourself and have the swagger to full speed head towards 10 flights or 10 stairs, not flights of stairs, and flick your board and land on top of it is a long process of learning how to trust yourself. So how do you take that thought of kicking the skateboard as fast as you can towards the stairs and then performing a trick and landing on it? That process is the same process that we should go through for our ego, for our paradigms, for everything. It's not the default. It is the entire point of having a thought or an idea, which isn't yours, and then turning it into a process for action. So you nailed it. To me.
Nailed it. I like it.
Yeah.
Gordo, any thoughts on this?
I think it's exactly what both of them just said, that you have to have stake in the game. And after repetition of doing something, you're going to become confident in it. I really like to lead with data with a lot of stuff, because sometimes the spiritual things people don't like absorb it the same way, but it's logical that if you do something over and over and over and over and over, that you're going to get better at it. So, and the only way you can do that is to do it over and over and over again. You have to have skin in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, any thoughts?
Once you ollie down that or kickflip down that 10 stair and you've got that on lock and you feel it and it belongs to you, make sure you find a way to help somebody else find that for themselves. Give them a tip, stand there and hand them their water bottle after the 14th slam, and just make sure that you're a part of their process as well if you're able to be.
It's going really well. I like where everything's going here. Sean, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, actually, I like the way that Mike put it across, the evolutionary generational process of what it used to mean to have swagger, what swagger means nowadays, which are two radically different things. When I think of people with swagger, I think of guys like Steve McQueen as the example, and certainly Charles Bronson, without a doubt. And they had a quiet aura about them that radiated confidence, radiated, I've got this. Where I'm standing is what I own, and I'll own as much as I want to around me based on what I want to own. That's kind of the aura that they put off. Whereas now, and geez, I'm going to try to stay away from the being too hard on modern society and the metrosexuals who have, today's photo will have them in the most comfortable cashmere sweater from Italy that's purchased, not earned. And it'll be a contrived image that we'll see on yet another Hollywood video of, Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds having yet another metrosexual moment that is just making the unicorns of the internet just go all to Twitter. And that's not my world. And I appreciate what those guys are doing, I guess, for part of society that loves on that stuff. But that ain't my jam, because that ain't swagger. That's contrived Hollywood portrayal, which happens every single day. And it happens so frequently and so pervasively that now modern society believes that the idealized version of a man is that metrosexual sweater in a comfortable interview space with a few laughs that are almost empty. And so we now have almost an empty society that is flaring out through cashmere sweaters and portraying what it means to be a three-dimensional human that has swagger. And in my world, it's almost the opposite of my version of swagger. Swagger is something that you learn in silence, out of the limelight, through the grind, where no one gets to see what you've been doing for 2 or 3 decades. And then you become maybe noticed, but you don't try to build that momentary notice into, I'm a big deal. Wait till you get to know me, which is what Hollywood does. Hollywood to me is the opposite of swagger. It is the anti-swagger. My idea of swagger is guys like Gordo. I'm going to use him as an example because I saw an image of him this morning on the Instrawebs, and it was Gordo on a drop zone and taking a selfie. And if you're a casual observer of these kind of images, all you'll see is a dude wearing army gear on a snowy field and think, yeah, big deal. I've seen a million of those photos. But if you're not in the game, if you haven't studied humans, if you don't actually understand swagger, you won't see the moment for what it was. And that is the look in his eyes. It's not the helmet that he's wearing. It's not the patches that he's got on. It's not the backdrop that he's in. Look at another dude's eyes. Look him right in the eyes. And in that image, I can see a dude who's got swagger because he's been in the frickin' game. And it's written all over him in his eyes. And so Hollywood to me has a lot of empty eyes. The dudes who are out there swaggering in the quiet, there's an entire movie once you look in their eyes. And so, you know, maybe I've got it wrong. Maybe I came up through different generations around different people so that I got a different definition of what swagger is. But the world that I look at, the external world around me, as portrayed by the Ryan Reynolds of the world, is not my cup of tea when it comes to swagger.
I got a couple of points on this, and then we'll get some final thoughts. And the interestingly enough, this brought up the mindset of my granddad out on the ranch. He had a swagger. He had an aura to him, as you guys say, but it's due to the fact that he's lived life the hard way, the really hard way. Southern Alberta in early 1900s on a ranch with no neighbors for miles and miles and miles, and the only transportation was a horse. Right? That's a different lifestyle. And the people that you guys are bringing up, like Steve McQueen or Charles Bronson or Clint Eastwood or things like that, these are people who have lived life. They've done things. And so that aura that they're portraying in movies is a physical aura. That's who they are. And as time has passed, you guys are saying, the actors, the people in Hollywood are just, they haven't done the things. Some have, not all of them, but some of them have actually done life and others haven't. And those people that have done life, you can usually separate them pretty easily. And the concept, I guess, that I wanted to get across right here at the end is the fact that my dad gave me this line, and I thought it was kind of silly for the longest time, but it just kind of crystallized in my head as you guys were talking, was the fact of, you're never really lost if you know exactly where you are. And I know exactly where I am because I'm right here. And I think a lot of people out in the world, they're just lost. They have no idea where they are. And they're constantly looking elsewhere, externally, to find those places to be. And it's everyone's just walking around lost, unfortunately. I can't say everyone. A lot of people are walking around lost. Let me put it that way. So with that, let's get some, actually, before I even say final thoughts, thank you guys. This has been a fantastic conversation. We've hit a lot of depth, and I know that we could probably spend the next 3 days talking about this. We have everybody here has a lot of experience in it, but I'm going to have to cut her short because at some point my wife's going to want me upstairs. Let's get some final thoughts, and then we can shut her down for the afternoon. I'm going to start at the top. Steve, final thoughts. What do you got?
Happy to be here, and just make sure that you're trying to see life as through the lens of it's meant to be lived, and then just take one step towards living it. And it's I think if you can do that string a few days together, all of a sudden you'll start seeing the potentials, and you'll want to get after it a little bit more. If anybody out there is traveling this summer, make sure you stay safe and try and do something kind for somebody else.
Love it. Gordo, final thoughts?
Yeah, I'll quickly talk what Sean said about the swagger thing in the photo. And it's funny because like when I think social media is a tool for me at this point, like it's actually very time consuming to try to like make sure things are around all the time and blah, blah, blah. And you would think you would post a picture like, I just jumped out of an airplane and I'm so cool. And it's like, I find like real for me, my own swagger is that like, I don't even care about that. Like, I don't care about that or the likes that come from it. Like if there's a business plan behind it all, I'm more interested in what's happening right now and what's going to happen tomorrow. So swagger in itself isn't about like how cool you are and what you're doing. If anything, swagger comes from not talking about any of that stuff and just doing. So deeds, not words, acting on verba. Got to have some skin in the game. You have to put yourself out there, guys, because if you don't, then you're not going to experience it the fullest. And that's it. Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. Always a pleasure.
Always. The pleasure is ours, brother. Absolutely. Mike, any final thoughts? Sorry, I muted you. Hold on. Go ahead.
Lots of thoughts. Love what Sean said. Yeah, I'm in the same pool as Sean. I grew up on these guys. When you see that in history, McQueen was able to talk to Bronson on the set of the Magnificent Seven, and really it's because they had really tough childhoods, and they were able to connect that in that way. And it wasn't about bragging or being a victim. It was saying, hey, life is tough, but you did things, but it is not contrived. And I see so much out there is very contrived, posing, making cheesy, silly videos for laughs and likes. I think that's very unmanly. That's just something unseemly. I just don't appreciate it. That's just me. You don't have to be me. Agree with Clay as well. This idea today that we should accept what's being pushed upon us. I'm not going to be always vocal because I see it as being more or less alpha. If someone's on the same team and they're talking about masculine traits and the culture wars we're going through, I'm not going to attack them. I may say something on the side, but they're still on the same team, just at a different place. For me, at the end of the day, I am just trying to turn thought into action. The people I do like are those quiet people, those quiet professionals, deeds, not words, get out there. And there is, for me, some type of sacredness or holiness or some type of preservation of these masculine values that we have to hold on to. It is a person who's done repetition over and over and over, and you just know it. He's able to do it without screaming at you or yelling at you because he knows himself. He knows himself, and therefore he probably can read you by mirroring. Maybe he might be wrong, but mostly, there are human values, human concepts that we all share traits, so we can read people. And I think most guys with swagger have been there, done that, and they don't need to talk about it all day long. At the end of the day, this has been a great show. Loved having all the guests on. Thanks for having me. Those are my final thoughts.
Always a pleasure. Clay, any final thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So thoughts to action is the process of learning how to trust yourself. And I think where, that came from you guys more than it did me is that swagger or that confidence, the machismo or whatever that is. I guess the best metaphor could be, most of you guys do jujitsu. I know Sean and Chance do. I don't know about you other guys if you do jujitsu or not, but so there's black belts, and then there are people who grab you and you're like, okay, that's a black belt, right? So there's an internal quality that is just oozing from a person. I think trusting yourself and knowing yourself is that internal quality that comes from the people that you guys are mentioning, like Steve McQueen. It's not just that they're actors, it's that there's an internal quality of assuredness that they're able to portray even in the role that they're playing. So learning how to trust yourself is the process of putting thoughts to action. And again, like everyone else said, I just really appreciate you guys. It's always fun to come on here and parse out these thoughts and get to know everybody, and hopefully talk to you guys again sometime.
For sure. I'm never letting you get away from this show. You're always going to be here. Don't worry. Sean, any final thoughts?
Yeah, thoughts to action. So Gordo may have tried to shirk his responsibility of being a great representation of a dude who has put thoughts and action in their place. But I'm going to hold him accountable. I'm going to flash the spotlight back on him again and say that, look, no one has to pretend to be something that they're not. Just be who you are. But if you've been it long enough, then there's no portrayal. You simply are who you are, and the photo captures the moment for what it is. So when I saw the photo of Gordo, he's a dude who's facta non-verbid. And I can see that as clear as day. As can others, I'm sure. But not everyone can see it for what it is. And I believe it's because of this. And I'll hold everyone accountable on this one. I think that people who are responsible to portray what thoughts to actions mean are not actioning enough by putting it out there for others to see. Gordo, as the example, did that this morning. But Gordo doesn't do it often enough. A lot of people who could be great representations of thoughts to action, what the outcome can be if you live a good life where you live a righteous pursuit of excellence. People should see more of this, not less of it. I know it's easy for probably Gordo and me. It'd be easy for us to just disappear and hang out in the shadows and not chirp too much. But that was then, and this is now. And now society needs a bit of help. There's young men out there for sure. This is freaking guaranteed, and we all know it. There's young men out there who are desperate to identify another man who's lived a character-filled life that you can see in their eyes. They are men of action, an action man. I think young men need to see more of it. And that doesn't mean that we have to contrive these moments. It just means that we've got to let more people into our lives, make ourselves a little bit more available to the young men like me when I was 17 and 18 years old that needed a strong man in his life, needed a strong leader in his life, needed a lighthouse to move towards. There weren't any back then, really, like there are now. It's available all around us. But I do believe that certainly up here in Canada, as the example, we just need more Gordos to do more Gordo so that people can pick up what he and others like him are putting down.
Yeah, Gordo. Start cloning yourself. We need more people like you.
Okay.
I can't thank you guys enough. This has been a fantastic conversation. And to your point, Sean, I think when you look at this panel, it is a perfect representation of what the collective was designed to be. And for those that don't know, the collective was a thought that Sean had a year and a half ago, just after Remembrance Day. He's like, we need to figure out a way to help. And this is where we're at. Now we have 6 people who have lived lives, have actually done many things, who have experienced this universe, sharing that information with the world. And to your point, Sean, I would add also not just young men that need this, men need this across the board. Age has nothing to do with it, but you're right. There are a lot of young men that are not in good straits. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you all. This has just been a fantastic conversation. Continue every day to get out there and learn, build, and grow. We'll see you all tomorrow. Chimo. Actually, next week, not tomorrow. Jeez. I'm all over the place right now.